My name is Keith Launchbury, and I'm here today to talk to you about the future of supply chain management in a COVID world. I am a former president of APICS, which is currently known as the Association for Supply Chain Management. And I've been a previous instructor for APICS certification programs for over 30 years. I have 40 years of business experience. I've worked with 150 different companies worldwide. I'm widely recognized as a speaker at international conferences. I also helped develop 2 courseware modules for APICS. I'm a former chair of the APICS Curricular and Certification Council. I'm an accomplished author, having written 3 books about business, 1 about healthcare, and also a novel. I am a master instructor for the Demand Driven Institute, and you can reach me at keithlaunchbury@gmail.com. Who predicted what would happen in 2020? I know the International Olympics Committee were planning on having a big Olympics event every 4 years, and it was going to be in Tokyo in 2020. But what happened is the coronavirus came along, and that's how 2020 will be remembered. We certainly didn't think that anything was going wrong. This is the family getting together to celebrate my quadrennial birthday. I am lucky because I only have a birthday every 4 years, and it just happens to come around in 2020. We were having indoor dining at a restaurant with 18 people in our party. There were no face masks, there was no social distancing, and no worries. It was very nice to get together with a family like that. On March the 2nd, 2020, my wife and I set off on our dream vacation. We were going to go on a cruise, and the cruise was going to take us to these beautiful islands in the Indian Ocean, and it was going to be a fantastic time. But what happened was on March 11th, the WHO declared that COVID-19 had become a global pandemic. So our dream vacation that we had planned didn't go according to plan. All these beautiful places, we got to see them from the ship because the ship was not allowed to dock in any ports until we got to South Africa. And then we were very nervous about whether we would be allowed out of South Africa and to be able to come back to the United States. So what was the global impact of coronavirus? This is the trade impact of coronavirus in US dollars, in billions of dollars. And that's huge economic impact, a staggering impact on global education, dramatic impact there. The top 10 countries by coronavirus's deaths, per capita figures show big differences in the scale of outbreaks, but a huge impact. And we know that a lot of businesses lost in 2020. The airline industry, other transportation, lodging, hospitality, retail, food service, all these businesses were severely impacted in 2020. Entire industry sectors were devastated. Leisure and hospitality, education, health services, professional business services, dramatic impacts across the board. And no one had predicted this. And in the space of 1 year, 500,000 Americans are dead, and that's excess deaths above normal in any normal year. But 2020 was not a normal year. Millions are unemployed, and they're still unemployed to this day. Many businesses were forced to close because of coronavirus. Disneyland, a lot of hotels, the empty cruise ships were parked off the coast. The airlines had to scramble to find places to put their grounded airplanes. So lots of businesses lost out. And some businesses went bankrupt. Men's Warehouse, Ruby Tuesday, 24 Hour Fitness, Hertz. These are all companies in the United States that went bankrupt during 2020. But some companies did rather well. Procter & Gamble, they increased their sales in 2020. Amazon increased their sales by $100 billion, and that's about 40% increase in their net profit. Netflix had an unprecedented growth amid the pandemic, and of course, companies like Zoom did very well. So what happened to your business plans during 2020? How did all your sales forecasting, your budgeting, and your business planning work out for you? What was your reality? Did you need to pivot quickly? Will your business survive in this new normal? Here's a real-world example. This is a charity that was set up by my wife, Claire Bloom, in 2010. And it has been providing weekend food for school children, combating what we call food insecurity when children do not know where the next meal is coming from. And the name of the charity is End 68 Hours of Hunger, because it's 68 hours from the last meal they get in school on Friday until the first meal they get in school the following Monday. And what we do is we pack bags of food which are delivered by volunteers directly to the schools every week. So we never come in contact with the children. It's an anonymous program, and we just drop off the number of bags of food with the guidance counselors at the school, and then they take them and deliver them to the children in need. We're feeding 4,000 school children every week, spending about $40,000 on food, and we do it in 46 locally run programs operating in 7 states across America. It's run by thousands of volunteers supported by private donations with zero administrative overhead. So every dollar given goes to feed the hungry children. But in 2020, the COVID pandemic hit. All the schools closed. The children were still hungry, but there was no food in the stores. The reality was there was a huge impact. So the demand increased due to the school closures. Children could no longer rely on getting meals provided at school. Many parents lost their jobs, and food was needed every day, not just on the weekends. The distribution system shut down. Volunteers were reluctant to help with food packing, so 68 hours became 168 hours. And consumer hoarding led to a rationing of food by grocery stores, which meant that the supply chain broke down. So all these things happened at the same time. But what did we do? 68 hours and 68 Hours of Hunger adapted to the new reality. We designed and implemented a web-based home food ordering and delivery system for hungry children. We set up a gift card system for parents to buy food for their families. We arranged alternate food supply through food banks and a contract with a company called US Foods. We set up alternate distribution channels through home delivery and also drop off at a community center so children could drop in and pick it up. And as a result of this quick action, 4,000 children are still being fed, and now they're being fed through the week as opposed to just on the weekend. So in 2020, the business world learned the true meaning of VUCA. Now, VUCA means volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that really is the world that we're living in today. 2020 was the year that everything changed. Conventional business models were rendered useless. The pandemic changed the world very quickly. Forecasting became useless. Everybody learned how important supply chain management is by the failure to keep products on the shelf, especially things that were in high demand, like sanitizing wipes, personal protective equipment. A lot of N95 masks are still not available. So it's not about cost anymore. Cost management is irrelevant today in today's world because customers expect rapid response, and flow management is now critical instead of cost management. The business challenges continue into 2021. No business was prepared for this level of impact, and demand changes are coming at a rapid pace and it's accelerating. Businesses face major challenges. There's higher demand volatility, limited supply availability, and there's extensive supply chain disruption. There are product shortages, we have useless inventory, and we have wasted capacity. So the question is, what can we do about all those challenges that we're facing today? Conventional wisdom is virtually dead. We cannot have a conference. Having a meeting is unthinkable, a face-to-face meeting. We do everything by Zoom. Now, this is an article that was published in Harvard Business Review in August 2018, and it predicted the imminent death of supply chain management. And if you look at the article, you can interpret through the article that these are the top 10 problems with conventional supply chains. The first one is that supply chains assume a straightforward linear relationship between a customer and a single supplier, and that's just extended up and down a supply chain, and the assumption is that the chain is as strong as its weakest link. That is an interesting metaphor, but it doesn't represent what we're dealing with today, which is supply networks. Supply chains only flow downstream. They don't flow in a reverse direction. Supply chains are rigid and inflexible. They're not integrated. The systems do not talk to each other. They plan at the speed of night. If you're running a planning system, you're probably updating it once a week, and that's called regen, and once a night, and that's called net change. So every company is running a batch net change MRP system every night. And the problem is, if you have an extensive supply chain, it takes nights to get that message from one end of the supply chain to the other end of the supply chain. Supply chains are cost-driven. They're not flow-driven. Supply chains contain far too much waste. They're too slow, and they contain too much risk. And in addition to all that, they're not intelligent, they're not adaptive, they cannot react, they cannot respond. So global supply chains have increased our risk, and they've increased the amount of lead time required. So there's more inventory in transit, and there's more inventory at risk while it is in transit. Most businesses are still making decisions on the basis of forecasting and costing. But the obsessive focus on reducing costs causes businesses to make the wrong decisions. It ends up inevitably being a bimodal distribution of inventory. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a few minutes. The planning systems are based on forecasts that lead to excess inventory and material shortages, in some cases on the same item. It can be in the wrong location. Economies of scale lead to the tendency to have bigger batches, bigger containers, bigger ships, larger risks, and bigger problems. And efficiency-based measurement systems reward the wrong behaviors. They reward maximum utilization, highest output, lowest cost. This leads to higher levels of unsold inventory and doesn't improve customer service or product flow. The constraint in most supply chains is that we're using legacy system technologies that were designed in the 1950s for a world that existed then but has not existed since. The supply chain is the heart of the company's operation because it is what brings a product to market. You can have all the best ideas, and if you cannot bring them to market, it is useless. So the supply chain is what enables brilliant ideas to come to market in the most effective way. To make the best decisions, managers need access and visibility to real-time data about their supply chain. But unfortunately, it's not available. The limitations of legacy technologies can thwart the goal of end-to-end visibility across a supply chain. However, those days will soon be behind us, because within 5 to 10 years, the supply chain function as we know it today may become obsolete. Because new digital technologies that have the potential to take over supply chain management entirely are disrupting our traditional ways of working. We're talking about digital control towers. We're talking about network, adaptive intelligent networks, product flow networks. These things are going to have a huge impact. Within 5 to 10 years, the supply chain function may be obsolete, replaced by a smooth running, self-regulating utility that optimally manages end-to-end workflows and requires very little human intervention. You don't need planners, you don't need schedulers, you don't need buyers, because all those functions can be automated. But what you will need is you will need people who know how to manage and how to design a product flow network that's adaptable and reactive. So business in the new normal is going to be very different. We're living in a new business reality. It's not just another recession. It's not just going to be for another few months until everybody gets vaccinated. The vaccines will not magically put things back to the way they were in 2019. We already know that many, many people are not planning to have the vaccination. And we know that we'll never get to herd immunity without 80 to 85% of the people in the population being exposed to the virus or vaccinated and protected by the virus, from the virus. The pandemic will likely become endemic. And what that means is that we're going to have to learn to live with it. Just like we learn to live with the flu and the common cold, we have to learn to live with the coronavirus. The world is fundamentally different now. People are not going to work the way they used to go to work in 2019. They're not going into cities, commuting through the rush hour traffic to go to a high-rise building and sit in offices with other people all day. That's not going to happen in many, many cases. The virus is here to stay, and we have to learn to live with it, just like we have with the common cold. The only businesses that will survive in a COVID-driven world will be demand-driven adaptive enterprises, like End 68 Hours of Hunger, looking at how the demand shifted very quickly and then adapting to that change with new ideas and new ways of delivering product to those hungry children. So what we're really talking about is a demand-driven adaptive enterprise model. And when we think about planning, we often think about planning as a top-down hierarchy, like a triangle. We start with a forecast at the product group level, going out maybe 5 years into the future. We take a subset of that, we break it down to a narrower portion of that sales forecast into a sales and operation plan. We take that into a master production schedule, and we take that into an MRP or a capacity requirements plan, and then we execute against that plan. Everyone's very familiar with the top-down planning hierarchy, but the Demand-Driven Institute have replaced that with a horizontal process, because it is a process. And what happens is it's an iterative feedback loop. So adaptive S&OP is looking out to the market to see what the market demand is doing. Demand sensing, trying to find out which direction the market is going in. And giving business plan parameters to a demand-driven S&OP, sales and operation plan. And that will then convert these business plans into models that can be executed by the demand-driven operating model. Then we get feedback from the demand-driven operating model, which gives us variance analysis into our demand-driven sales and operation plan, which can provide feedback into our adaptive S&OP to give us the ability to ask what-if questions and simulations, simulate different models, projections, and strategic recommendations at the adaptive S&OP level. So that is the essence of the planning that occurs within a demand-driven adaptive enterprise model. So what you have on the right is you have market demand coming in, and what you have on the left is you have actual customer orders coming in into the short-term demand-driven operating model. So that's the way that the demand-driven adaptive enterprise will work in the future. Now, customers do not care about your costs. What they care about is timely, accurate, and effective delivery of a service or a product at a reasonable price. Now, obviously, there is some relationship between cost and price, but most companies are thinking only in terms of cost instead of thinking about what is a reasonable price. Sustainable business success depends more on how you manage cash flow than it does how you manage cost, because cash flow management is what it's all about in terms of a business. More should come in than goes out. It's very simple. And if you increase your product flow to market, you will get increased cash flow coming back in the return. So the key question for you is, what is your product velocity? It's all about the speed of sale. And the lean supply chain is all about fast response to the sale, fast response with fast, flexible flow. So products should flow at the rate at which they're being consumed in the market. Product flow should be measured in real time, not at the end of the day or at the end of the week or the end of the month, but in real time, minute by minute during the day. We need to measure product velocity, the speed of sale, and product velocity determines our profit velocity. Now, what is important to flow? Products must have perceived value, and the customer is the one who determines what that perceived value should be. That's why it's all about price. The customer is price sensitive, so value is determined by the customer. What do I get for what do I pay? Products with no value will not flow. Customer orders trigger product flow, not forecasts. Product outflow determines our cash inflow, and process variability impedes flow. So if we look at all the sources of variability, the first one is on the supply side. We know we don't always get consistent supply from our suppliers. They don't always deliver on time. They don't always deliver exactly what we want, and it's not always 100% reliable when we get it. So we've got variability coming from our suppliers. On the other hand, we've got customers, and they often change their minds. And there's demand uncertainty and demand variability coming at us from the right. Meanwhile, we have management, and management often impose their rules on how we should do things from the top. So we've got information being given to us top down, and also variability coming from both sides. And in addition to that, we have operational variability, which is where one process is not always consistent, not always reliable, and that then just creates a lot of variation in the organizational output. So today's reality is we have this bullwhip effect. And the more parts we have, the worse the effect. But what it says is that a slight variation at the consumer level gets amplified as it goes up the supply chain. And it also gets amplified coming back down the supply chain in the reverse direction. So here's what happens. We get distortion to relevant information, and that is going from right to left. And from left to right, we get distortion in relevant materials. The only way to mitigate this variability and control the bullwhip effect is to stop distortion from being passed between the parts of the system in both directions. This is accomplished by decoupling and then buffering the decoupling point. So here's a decoupling point, and what we're doing there is essentially creating independence between supply and the customer. And what we do is we put in place a firewall, and the firewall absorbs variability. Now, a firewall is rated for a certain temperature and a certain length of time. No firewall will withstand a huge inferno, but they are designed to protect fire from spreading from one section to another, and they have a certain capacity. And every buffer has a capacity. It's like a sponge. It can absorb a certain amount of variability up to a point, and at some point, the sponge will say, I cannot absorb any more variability. So it's important to size our buffers correctly, but it's also important to put them in the right locations strategically where they will make the best use of that capacity that we have, because essentially a buffer is an area of stored capacity. Now, there are two universal points of inventory. And if you go to most companies, they'll tell you this. We've either got too much inventory or not enough. And very few companies actually have any idea what the right level of inventory should be. There should be an optimal range in the middle, and we should have a normal distribution about that optimal range, but we don't. Instead, what we have is a bimodal distribution of inventory, where there's a normal distribution centered around having too little, and there's another one centered around having too much. And we tend to oscillate backwards and forwards. Planners often go backwards and forwards from the Oswald situation, which is, oh, shoot, we're out, we don't have enough, into the DEFROA situation, oh my gosh, we've got too much, but don't ever run out again. You know, so we're oscillating backwards and forwards between two different management directives, either, you know, have too much or have too little, but nowhere do we have the right amount of inventory. But with demand-driven planning, we will get the right amount of inventory by using smart buffers. A smart buffer is strategic, managed, adaptable, robust, and tolerant. And here's an example of a buffered product flow network where we've identified the strategic locations where we want to put these buffers so that we can absorb variability, so that we can deliver to the customer in the shortest possible time frame without having to build it from scratch, right? From ordering raw materials coming from suppliers that are the end of a global supply chain that could take months. Instead, see how quickly we can get it delivered off the shelf into the customer's hands. And there are three types of buffers that we can use. We can use a stock buffer, and that basically is the one I used in the previous example. It's like the fuel tank in your car. When you fill the fuel tank, you're in the green level. But as you use the car, you're driving around, you're consuming gas, and as a result, the gas level drops and drops and drops. And most cars have a gas gauge, and some people look at them, and other people drive the car until the warning light comes on, and it says you've only got 30 miles left. You better find a gas station quick. So this is the same thing with a stock buffer. That's what we want to have. Another type of buffer is called a time buffer, and we often use that for padding our time estimates on project plans, just to make sure that if anything goes wrong, then we've still got some safety that we can deal with before it becomes critical and before it becomes too late. So most people understand what a time buffer is. And there's a capacity buffer where we keep additional capacity just in case we need it. And we look at utilization to say, if we're less than 80% utilized, that's okay. And the closer you get to 95 or 100% utilized, the more danger there is of overloading the resource and the resource breaking down. So we have to be very careful about capacity buffers. Now you can have all three types of buffer in a buffered product flow network. So buffers protect for 6 things. The first one is customer tolerance lead time. This is how long is your customer prepared to wait before they take their business somewhere else. And most companies have a very good idea what that lead time is. That's your customer tolerance lead time. Another one is market potential lead time. That's how much additional business would you get if you could cut your lead time by, let's say, 20 or 30%. Would you get any additional business? Another one is demand variability. That's how much does the variation change around the average daily usage. The supply variability is your likelihood for disruption caused by a breakdown in your supply chain. So that's called supply variability, and buffers protect for both. Inventory leverage and flexibility. Where are the positions in your product flow network where it makes sense, where you keep all your options open to the last possible minute, and you only customize when you get a committed order from a customer. So you can try to get into an assembled to order environment by having everything kept at a semi-finished level that you can put together very quickly into the finished package and send it out to the customer. So that's a good example for inventory leverage and flexibility, putting your inventory in the right place. And then protecting your critical operations, those that you do not want to go down because they are fundamental. They're the ones that are the gating resource that determines your ability to deliver to your customer. Now, buffers are dynamic. They're not like safety stock. Safety stock in most companies is one number. They pull it out of the air, they calculate it, they put it into the item master file, And from there on in, instead of planning to zero, which was what most MRP systems are designed to do, it plans back to a replenishment level of the safety stock. So all you did was took the zero level and increased it to the level of safety stock. But buffers are different because they're dynamic. They're recalculated on a regular basis. Typically, we calculate the average daily usage on a weekly basis. And then we monitor that, and then we adjust the buffer if necessary based on the rate of change of the average daily usage. If it goes up, the buffer is flexed up. If it goes down, the buffer is flexed down. Make sense? Yes. And then the other use of buffers is in the area of demand adjustment, where you have seasonal products, where you have anticipated additional demand during certain seasons, or you're doing other things like phasing in a new product or phasing out an old product. This is where we're going to use a demand adjustment factor. So what is demand-driven planning? It is a visual product flow positioning and protection system designed to improve business performance and increase return on working capital. That's what it's designed to do. And this is what it has done. This is DDP's proven benefits coming from a study that was done by Camelot about 18 months ago. And what they looked at was 3 areas of proven business benefits: inventory reductions, customer service improvement, and lead time reduction. And what they noticed was overall, the average inventory reduction overall is 31%. Best in class is 60%. The customer service improvement average was 11%. Best in class is 45%. Lead time reductions, in some cases, the average was 22%, but best in class was up to 85%. Now, lead time reductions tend to come from make-to-order companies, and inventory reductions tend to come from make-to-stock companies. But every company can achieve some level of benefit. And there you can see the impact in life sciences, chemicals, consumer products, and industrial manufacturing. So these are proven DDP's benefits. This is one specific example on one SKU for one company, a fast-moving consumer goods company. And on January the 1st, this was in 2015, their inventory stood over 500,000. And I want you to look at that diagram and notice that it's very similar to a statistical process control chart, where the deep red and the red zones are out of control. Yellow is approaching the control zone, but green is the control zone. So here's a company at the beginning of this year, 2015, their inventory was out of control. And what they did in the space of 2 months using DDP was they got it down to half what it was on January the 1st. By February the 28th, they were down to 250,000. And notice what happened after that. It stayed within the green zone. So the savings that they got initially were 250,000. Now that's a one-time capital investment saving. In addition to that, they get the ongoing carrying cost avoidance of not having to have that amount of inventory anymore. So there's a 50% inventory reduction, and then it is sustainable. And that's the key thing about demand-driven planning. It is sustainable, and you can show people what the right level of inventory should be. So demand-driven planning provides the information skills and the analytical tools that empower intelligent product flow networks. It's very easy to see how demand-driven planning can be used by machine learning and artificial intelligence to create intelligent product flow networks. It's very simple to do that. And if you want more information, there are some websites you can go to. You can go to the DDMRP LinkedIn group. You can also go to the Demand Driven Institute website. Or if you want to, you can contact me directly, and I'd be happy to address any questions you might have. So thank you for paying attention, and I wish you well. And I hope your business survives in the COVID world, and I think it's got more chance if it's a demand-driven, adaptive enterprise. Thank you very much.